All right. Well, welcome back, guys. Happy New Year. We were just all talking about our day, and now we're on chapter 11, positive reinforcement. We're really excited to talk about reinforcement because, as you know, reinforcement is the most important and most widely applied principle in behavior. And we use it all the time, even before you became a behavior analyst. You've been reinforcing your spouse, your kids, your dogs, whoever it is, to try to increase some type of behavior, or try to reinforce or get them to continue doing whatever the desirable behavior is. But yeah, so this chapter is going to go into foundations. How much of the test is on foundations? Isn't that an important one? Concepts and principles, 32 questions, 18% of the exam is on concepts and principles. Going back to my little BACB little outline. So this one's going to go into some concepts and principles before, define and provide examples of positive and negative reinforcement. B7, define and provide examples of automatic and socially mediated contingencies. B8, define and provide examples of unconditioned, conditioned, and generalized reinforcers and punishers. And then applications, which will go into some behavior assessment. Behavior assessment is 18 questions, 10% of your exam. And then we have G1, behavior change procedures, where we're going to learn about using positive and negative reinforcement procedures to strengthen behavior, establish and use conditioned reinforcers. All right. So who wants to give us the definition of positive reinforcement, since that's the first thing that they talk about on page 252 and 253. So one of the most basic principles. Who wants to go ahead and try to explain positive reinforcement in their own words?
Positive reinforcement is when something that is added or presented that would most likely affect future or increase future behaviors.
Yes.
I'm trying to do it like my own term.
Yeah, perfect. So we're adding some type of, usually it's a wanted stimulus. So you're adding some type of wanted stimulus to increase the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future. And I used to teach RBTs. I created an RBT training curriculum for my company. I don't know if I've told you guys this, but I love to teach this, but I love to teach it all as a whole and like as a diagram. I don't know if I've done that with you guys, with like the little diagram where it's like positive on one side, negative on one side, plus minus. Should we do it? Should we try it?
I think chapter 4 or something.
Yeah, I feel like we've already kind of talked about it.
Yeah, chapter 4
Okay.
or 5.
Okay, so I guess this will be kind of like a review.
Yeah.
Okay. So positive reinforcement occurs when a response is followed immediately by the presentation of a stimulus change that increases the future occurrence of similar responses. So that is one of the things that you want to remember about reinforcement, is how frequent should it occur, and how quickly. And the answer is always going to be immediate. Immediate's going to be the most effective way of reinforcing a behavior, because you want to make sure that you are immediately following the behavior that you want to increase. A lot of times people might slip up and they're like potty training, for example, and we're, let's say, giving a chocolate every time he voids, and the RBT forgot to give it to him in the bathroom immediately following the void. And so as he's washing his hands, she's like, oh yeah, here's this chocolate for going pee-pee in the potty or whatever. And that's really confusing, because now you might be reinforcing the hand washing. And so you're kind of blurring your contingency. So you want to make sure that it is immediate to be more likely to increase the future occurrence of similar responses. Does anybody want to give an example of reinforcement that they have used, like on their spouse or on your kids, that increases the behavior, to kind of give a real life example of positive reinforcement?
Could you say the if then situation? Like if you finish your broccoli, you can have ice cream? Is that more?
Yeah. So you would say the addition of the ice cream is reinforcing the behavior of eating the broccoli. Yeah.
Yes.
So she's using the Premack principle as a way to positively reinforce the behavior.
Mhm.
Or
Okay.
clean your room and get screen time.
Yeah, perfect. Clean your room and get screen time. I used to have a little board. I don't know if I've ever showed you guys, but I'm like all crazy with my kids. I have like a kind of like a token system where if they do what I ask them immediately, so if I only had to tell you one time, then you get a check. But if I had to like repeat it multiple times, or you didn't do it, then you don't get a check. Or I might use response cost and like take one away. Like, hey, I had to tell you so many times, you're gonna get a check mark taken away. But once they get all their little check marks, then they get $1 and they have their little savings. And once they get 5, we go to 5 and below and they get to pick a toy. So it's just
Wow.
kind of like a little motivator as a way to like increase their behavior of doing their chores, or whatever the behavior is that I want them to do immediately when I ask them to. So that's kind of like a funny real life example that I used positive reinforcement. Okay, so on page 254, you have the 2-term contingency. Positive reinforcement is a response is followed closely in time by a stimulus change. So they call that one an SR plus. So it's important that you guys know these little abbreviations, because you might see them on the exam and they might throw you off, when really it's something just so simple as a response and reinforcement. And so you guys know that response is a single occurrence of a behavior. So you have your occurrence of the behavior, and then quickly following it, you have your SR plus, which is going to be your positive reinforcement. So in the diagram on page 252,
Okay.
it's saying hold the cup under tap and push lever. So whenever you hold the cup under the tap and you push the lever, the cup flows into the water. So the response, or my single instance of behavior, was pushing the cup into the dispenser. And then the reinforcement was that I received water. So it's just very simple just breaking it down into that one single response and what was the reinforcement that quickly followed it, and what was its effect on the behavior's future occurrence. So that's another important thing. You want to know, did it increase or did it decrease? And so they have another example where it says, turn your head and look left, and you see a colorful bird. So you were quickly reinforced by seeing that bird. You really enjoyed it. So that was your positive reinforcement. Sorry guys, I'm pretty sure I had COVID, so that's why I'm like getting over a serious, I don't know, some type of serious cold.
What page are we on? I'm sorry, what page are we on?
We're on page 254. We were just talking about that diagram with the R and the SR plus.
Mhm.
Okay, and then they talk about positive reinforcer. So the stimulus that is presented as a consequence and that is responsible for the subsequent increase in responding is called a positive reinforcer, or simply a reinforcer. So they throw all of these random AKAs, and those type of things might confuse you in the exam. So just know that a positive reinforcer is simply a reinforcer. So in this example, it says teacher's attention in the form of positive praise was the reinforcer that increased Robbie's studying behavior. Okay, and another important thing to remember, it says, it is important to remember that a reinforcer does not and cannot affect the response that it follows. Making this point, Skinner reminded us that reinforcement affects the operant response class. To strengthen an operant is to make it occur more often. Reinforcement can also alter duration, latency, inter-response time, magnitude, and or topography of behavior. For example, if reinforcement follows only responses that fall within a certain range of magnitude, that is above a minimum force but below maximum force, responses within that range will occur more frequently. So what do you guys think that they mean by it can affect magnitude or topography of a behavior? So what is a way that we can increase magnitude or topography? So what came to my mind was like sometimes kids on the autism spectrum, they talk really low. And so sometimes we have to shape their behavior to try to get them to speak a little bit louder so that people can hear them or understand them. So maybe you are only reinforcing responses that are above a certain like decibel or something, like you can hear it clearly, then I'm going to give the item or the reinforcer or the sticker or whatever the case may be. So it's just telling us here that reinforcement can be used to shape all kinds of different, I guess it can just alter different things, duration, latency, reinforcement, magnitude, force. But yeah, can you guys think of any other examples where you're kind of shaping the behavior and maybe altering the duration, the latency, the response time?
I was thinking like when you go to church, how you need to always use inside voice or whisper. So you don't want somebody to go to church and screaming or talking really loud during a service. So would that be again magnitude, right?
Yeah,
Because,
magnitude. So maybe every time they are speaking softly, you're giving them positive attention or something like that. Like, oh, hey, I really like how you're using your inside voice or something
yeah,
to increase that low volume.
or frequency. So if they're not speaking, and when kids are young, they like to talk a lot in church. And if you tell them, if you don't speak for 5 minutes, you will then be rewarded something, a positive, whatever it is that they like, some sort of positive reinforcement to go for lunch or something. I don't know. Right?
Yeah, and what you're explaining is like an example of a DRL. So you are reinforcing lower rates of the response.
It's good, Selena.
Okay, what about if,
That's good. See,
It's good stuff.
you can,
if you tell a child to sit for or attend for 5 minutes, keeping the hands by himself, and then he gets the time to play with his favorite toy? I think that'll work for duration.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So he has to sit with calm hands. So we are decreasing the duration of what was the behavior?
Attending skills.
Okay.
Then he gets a chance to play with his favorite toy.
Okay. Yeah. You can also talk about duration with like let's say a tantrum. Like,
Okay.
oh, hey, today you only cried for 1 minute. So, so here you go. Here's a chocolate or something like that. But
Okay.
yeah, that can be another one.
that DRI then that piece is talking about, because you're saying are you saying to sit on your hands? Like that they can't have access to their hands?
Well, she was saying, I think they just put their hands down. So that can kind of be, you can kind of be using like a DRO for that one. So DRO, it has a lot to do with duration. So you always want to think about those two together. So with DRO, you're shaping the duration by increasing the time between or the length between responses. So I always give you guys the example of the DRO with the bracelet. So we might start them off with the bracelet for 5 seconds. If you have calm hands for 5 seconds, then you're able to attain reinforcement of 30 seconds of go crazy or something like that. So that can kind of go back to shaping duration or reinforcing different durations.
Okay.
Okay, and then it talks about immediacy of reinforcement. The direct effects of reinforcement involve temporal relations. That's also an important ABA term to kind of know. So we know what temporal is. What's temporal?
Time.
Yeah, where it is in time, right? So here it's telling us that the temporal relation, so where it is in time, affects the, I guess, like the potency of the reinforcer. So like we said, you always want to make sure that you do it immediately, so that you can make sure that you are strengthening that behavior. And so the closer you are to the behavior, the better. Hold on, let me go let my dog out. She's crying. If you guys want to talk about some different examples of immediacy, so anytime when you have seen somebody reinforce somebody incorrectly, so they didn't reinforce them immediately, so they might have reinforced some other different behavior. Hold on, I'll be right back.
I think about the supermarket when a mother is the child is, I don't know if this is accurate, but when a child's tantruming in the supermarket and then a mom is just trying to get the child to stop, so they give them anything in the, I mean, I remember being in those situations where you just want to give the child, you know, anything to, so they could stop, so that you can make it through the grocery store line. So that's immediate, and what you're reinforcing, I guess, bad behavior at that point, because you're reinforcing the tantruming.
Yeah, and do you know what that is called? That cycle? Pop quiz.
Circular,
It's called a behavior trap. I don't know if they teach us that in this book, but they call it a behavior trap. When you're accidentally reinforcing a behavior in order for yourself to get that negative reinforcement. So you're positively reinforcing a behavior and it's negatively reinforcing you. So then you get into what's called a behavior trap, where it's just like a loop where we're just reinforcing each other. I don't know where I heard that, but that's what they call it.
I've heard it in a class for a big ABA exam. I forgot who was the woman though. Passed the big ABA exam for her.
Oh, okay, so it's an actual thing.
Yeah, actual thing. I think she has it too. They have it too in their manual.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about immediacy and where the reinforcement is in time and its effect on the behavior. So you want to make sure that you're doing it within a few seconds. Okay, and so then the next one that we're going to talk about is rule governed behavior. That's my favorite one. I actually was talking to a girl about it, like in a bar one time, and she was so interested because she was like, oh my gosh, that's me. I didn't know that there was a name for it. So people that are rule governed, it means that they don't have to, I'm going to put it in my own words. They don't have to immediately come in contact with the consequence. They may have just heard like, hey, if you speed down I-10, there's always that cop there. So because I've heard that, I'm not going to do it. Or let's say my brother was an alcoholic and I saw him go through a lot of trials and a lot of stuff that I wouldn't want for my own self. So I'm just not going to do that. So those are rule governed behaviors. And so if you're able to think about it like that, it kind of makes more sense. When you're kind of answering questions in the exam, you're like, okay, what is rule governed? Rule governed means that they don't have to immediately come into contact with the behavior.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah, is there anybody who's rule governed? Or are you just the kind of person where you're like, oh, I gotta come into contact with the consequence or else I don't believe you?
I mean, I
Olga?
know some people in my life that are rule governed, and I'm just like, I mean, do we really have to listen to that rule?
Yeah, right.
Let's test. Like, I'm like more like, let's test the waters, you know?
Yeah, like how far can you go? That's
It's
me.
safer to be rule governed. It's safer.
Yes, it's safer.
Safer, yeah. It's like, well, I don't want to see that, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to know what's gonna happen.
Consequence, yeah.
Yeah. So Olga's rule governed. She wants to make sure that she's staying in line because she doesn't want to come into contact with the consequence.
It's just easier. Now, my kids, on the other hand, I think they're contingency based. Like they'll touch the hot stove to and then realize, even though I told them not to.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I've learned as a mom is like, no matter how many times I tell them, it's like they still end up doing it. So I'm like, all right, fall on your head. And then you'll come into contact with the consequence yourself. What do we call that?
Contingency based, right?
It's called natural consequence. When
Yeah. I actually had said it today to my kiddo. I'm like, listen, if you keep what's it called? Leaning your chair like that, you're gonna fall and get hurt. And then she just looked at me and smiled, and then she pushed her chair, and I was like, natural consequence, okay.
yeah, right.
And like after that, she was like terrified. I was like, all right, contingency right there.
Yeah, exactly. So she was not rule governed. She had to actually come into contact with the consequence in order for it to affect her behavior. Okay, so I'll read what Cooper says rule governed is. Let's see where it is. Rule governed behavior is behavior controlled by a rule. So a verbal statement of an antecedent behavior consequence contingency that enables human behavior to come under the direct control of temporary, remote, or improbable but potential significant consequences. So maybe Olga, your first then contingency is rule governed, right? Because they don't know yet, but they know because Olga told me that if I sit in my chair, she's gonna give me a chocolate. So that can be kind of, I guess, example of rule governed. If they have not already come into contact with it. So if Olga had already started giving him chocolates every time he sits, then it wouldn't be rule governed anymore. It would be more so contingency based or temporally he came into contact with that consequence. The following conditions provide strong indicators that behavior is a result of instructional control or is rule governed behavior rather than a direct effect of reinforcement. So no immediate consequence for the behavior is apparent. The response consequence delay is greater than 30 seconds. Behavior changes without reinforcement. A large increase in the occurrence of the behavior occurs following one instance of reinforcement. No consequence for the behavior exists, including no automatic reinforcement, but the rule exists. So I hope my crazy examples help to give you guys a better idea of what rule governed is.
So you don't get access to the consequent rule govern, right? Because you're following the law, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So it would
Yeah.
be delayed reinforcement because it's not immediate.
I guess so, yeah. No immediate consequence. The response consequence delay is greater than 30 seconds.
Okay. Oh, duh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe like highlight that little, I don't know, those little bullets on 255.
Selena, I know we'd be going a little bit too far ahead, but this is, unless we want to wait till we end the recording, but I think it's on page 740 about behavior trap. Can you talk about that a little bit, or should we wait till we get, because that's chapter like 30 or something, but.
Oh, the behavior trap?
Yeah, it's on page 740, but I just was wondering, I always thought that behavior trap was like when you use like a iPad for the kid, because you know that that's what they really like, and so they will then do just about anything that you need them to get done, whether it's in a classroom setting or whatever. It's like a trap that you're trapping them in order to do these other behaviors. Am I wrong with that? I don't know.
I think so, but if you want, we can wait until after when we stop recording, and then we can look at what Cooper says.
Okay, yeah, because that's chapter 30. You mentioned it and I'm like, okay, do I not have that concept down right? I'm just trying to make sure that
Yeah, we'll go back and look at it.
okay, thank you, sorry.
Yes, of course. Okay. And then it's going into talking about reinforcement is not a circular concept. Another common misconception is that reinforcement is the product of circular reasoning and therefore contributes nothing to our understanding of behavior. Not so. Circular reasoning is a form of faulty logic in which the name used to describe an observed effect is mistaken as the cause for the effect. Oh my gosh. Sometimes the way that they word things is so confusing.
The way I remember circular reasoning is like when like a parent was like, oh, they have autism, oh, they're stemming because they have autism.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's why I look at it, and I always like have that like in my head.
Yes. I always think
Like, when I
about
was
that
reading
too.
this before, and I'm like, why is Cooper putting so much words that they
Yes.
doesn't need extra words there?
Yeah, they could have just said it so much simpler. It's really funny because today I was in a meeting with my clinic director. We had like a BCBA meeting, and I saw that she had the Cooper 3 book. And so I was like, "Oh, you have Cooper 3. Let me look through it really quick because I have a meeting today with my group." And I pull her book from the shelf, and it's like perfect, crisp, looks like it's never been touched. And and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you should see mine. It's like falling apart. It has all this writing in it." She's
My
like, "Oh
sister,
yeah."
she hates it when people writes on it. Writes on like people. She's like, she has a list of people like she doesn't like, and she hates the people that highlights and like destroyed her book. I'm like, well, I'm one of those people, and I showed her, and she was like, ugh.
Oh my gosh, you have to. Some
I-
people are visual learners, and especially with Cooper, where you're like, just read this crazy paragraph, and you're like, okay, how can I put this into my own words or in a way that I understand? So that's what I would do. I would write in my own words on the side, or I would draw a picture or something like that. So I just thought that was funny that her book was like untouched, but it's because some people are afraid of it because of the wording. It's so complex sometimes. But yes, circular reasoning is what you're saying, where you are blaming it on kind of something else.
Mhm.
But yes, that's a perfect example. I have that in my notes somewhere, but I'll find it in a little bit. Here's an example of circular reasoning that occurs often in education. So a student persistent difficulty learning to read effect leads to a formal diagnosis of a learning disability, which is then offered as an explanation for the student's struggles with reading. So in this example, Yoshi's reading problem is due to his learning disability. And then they said, well, how do you know Yoshi has a learning disability? Because he hasn't learned to read. Why hasn't Yoshi learned to read? Because his learning disability has prevented him from learning to read. So it all just goes round and round and round. You're just always going back to blaming it on that one thing.
So Selena, can you say that if your baby is not sleeping, there's somebody say because he's not eating, that's why he's not sleeping well? Can it be circular concept?
Yeah, it can be circular reasoning if you're like the baby is not sleeping because he's not eating well, and they're like, well, why isn't he eating well? And you're like, oh, because he's not sleeping well. So you just keep like blaming one thing on the other, and you're just going kind of in like that circle.
Sure.
Okay, and it says over here, similarly, it would be circular reasoning if we said that teachers' attention increased Robbie's studying behavior because it is a reinforcer. Instead, it is correct to say that because Robbie's studying behavior increased when and only when it was followed immediately by the teacher's attention is a reinforcer. There is a difference more than the difference is more than the direction of the relation or same semantic sleight of hand. In circular reasoning, the suspect cause is not manipulated as an independent variable to see whether it affects the behavior. So that's one of the most important differences, is that the cause is not manipulated as an independent variable to see whether it affects the behavior. So basically what they're saying is that they're not manipulating the consequence, so the reinforcer. So adding it or taking it away is what's proving that we're increasing the behavior. If that makes sense. I don't know if I explained that correctly, but that's the way that my brain understood it. Okay, let's see. The vocabulary of reinforcement. So table 11.1, important ways to talk about reinforcement in different ways. So reinforcer is a noun, so that's a stimulus. So food pellets were used as reinforcers for the rat's lever presses. So reinforcer is the stimulus that we're adding that is increasing the behavior or the likelihood. Reinforcing is an adjective, a property of a stimulus. So the reinforcing stimulus was produced more often than the other non-reinforcing stimuli. Oh my gosh, do you guys know the difference between stimulus and stimuli?
Stimuli is a plural for stimulus.
Stimuli is one.
No,
Yes,
stimuli is
it's
more.
Oh,
more.
stimuli is many and stimulus is one.
It's one, yeah.
Okay.
I always got it confused when I started. I was like,
Me too.
wait, what?
Yeah, me too. I always get them confused. And like one of my supervisors, she uses them both. And my brain can't make sense of it. Like I just say stimulus for everything. I don't say stimuli. Or I guess I do say stimuli, like when I'm referring to like the cards, like, oh, he needs stimuli, like his little cards. Okay, so reinforcement noun is as an operation, the delivery of consequence when a response occurs. So the fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement delivered food after every 10th key peck. So that's more so talking about schedules of reinforcement. So it just wants us to be able to tell the difference between all of these things. And sometimes I've seen mock exams that like throw all of them in as an answer. So you have to kind of know what the difference is between all of them. Okay, as a process, the increasing and responding, that's results from the reinforcement. Okay, and then you have the verb form, which is to reinforce. As an operation to deliver consequences when a response occurs. Responses are reinforced and not organisms. That's another big thing that BCBAs or behavior analysts like to highly emphasize is we're not reinforcing the person, we're reinforcing the behavior. So just be very careful, like whenever you're talking to like those ABA snobs, that you know that we're not reinforcing people, we're reinforcing responses.
Mhm.
The same thing with the opposite, like where they say ignoring. We're not ignoring the child, you're ignoring the behavior, if that makes sense. So you always want to be like very clear on the way that you are speaking as a BCBA to other BCBAs, to RBTs, and to parents. Okay, relationship between reinforcement and antecedent stimulus conditions. So it says reinforcement does more than increase the future occurrence of behavior. It also changes the function of stimuli that immediately precede the reinforced behavior by virtue of being temporally paired with the response reinforcer, a reinforcer for the behavior practice. Okay, so example, answering as many math problems as you can in 1 minute. Practicing is a behavior that could be reinforced by various consequences, such as a preferred activity. Practice solving these math problems, then you can have 10 minutes of free time. Depending on the learner's history and preference, the opportunity to practice a certain skill may function as a reinforcer for practicing another skill. Finish your math problems, then you get to do 10 minutes of repeated reading practice. That's funny. It's kind of like giving options for low P's, low probability tasks, where you're like, do this, and then, or I don't know. That's just where my brain went. Artificial reinforcement. So what is artificial reinforcement? That's another AKA. So artificial reinforcement, I guess is what they're calling it now, is secondary, right? Have you guys heard secondary reinforcement?
Yeah. That's why I was confused. I thought secondary, I've heard, yes.
Yes. So I guess artificial, secondary, and there's another one that they call it. I can't think of it right now. But okay, so artificial is going to be more so those tangible items like stickers, trinkets,
Tokens, right?
yeah, tokens.
So like
Uh,
GPRs,
What is that?
like general condition reinforcers, are they like, is it the same thing? Because like tokens,
Yeah, I think that's the other AKA, right?
Yeah, condition.
So here, the reason why they're calling them artificial reinforcers is because they have artificial control over the behavior. So do you think that, oh, conditioned, yes, Denise, thank you, conditioned reinforcers. What was I saying? Artificial control. Okay, so artificial control can be like the example where I was saying, oh, every time he voids in the toilet, we give him a goldfish. So now him voiding in the toilet is kind of basically controlled by a whatever we call them, secondary reinforcer, having that artificial control. So eventually you want to fade out those artificial reinforcers so that reinforcement can become more natural. So I always tell my therapist to make sure that they are pairing their tangible reinforcers with social praise. So you always pair it with social praise so that eventually you can remove the edible or whatever that tangible reinforcer is. And then the social praise becomes reinforcing in itself. And it's always important to be very specific with your praise. Oh, wow, I really like how you pee-peed in the potty. Here's a goldfish or something like that. That way you can eventually fade out goldfish, and then only my social praise becomes reinforcing. And then eventually he doesn't need me at all. And he's just naturally reinforced by the fact that he has clean pants all day. And maybe they aren't making fun of him at school for always having accidents or something like that. So I guess that's why they're calling them artificial reinforcers, because they result in artificial control. The behavior, the consequence, or the result can be artificial. Okay. They're always contrived. That's another thing to know about artificial, is that they're contrived. Otherwise, there would be no need for the program.
Oh,
Okay, so I think that's enough about artificial reinforcement. Okay, reinforcement and feedback as synonyms. Some speakers and writers mistakenly use reinforcement and feedback interchangeably. The two terms refer to different operations and outcomes, though some of each term encompasses parts of the other term's meaning. So feedback is information a person receives about a particular aspect of his or her behavior following its completion. Very good, Kathy. 2 quarters equals 50 cents. Feedback is most often provided in the form of verbal descriptions of performance, but it can be provided by other means, such as vibration or lights. Because feedback is a consequence that often results in the increased future occurrence of behavior, sometimes leads to the faulty assumption that reinforcement must involve feedback, or that reinforcement is just a behaviorist term for feedback. So I guess if somebody's mistakenly using the term feedback as reinforcement, you can kind of correct them. Or when I'm writing my session notes, there's a part where it says feedback given to therapists. So I will write on there the things that I said, but not always is my feedback reinforcing, right? So sometimes I might have said something that wasn't meant to be reinforcing. Maybe it was kind of punishing in a way, because I'm like, hey, don't do that, or try to do this differently. But I am very specific in my notes when I do provide feedback in the form of positive reinforcement, in the form of social praise. So you have to be like very specific when you're speaking behaviorally, I guess.
I see why people get confused about it though. You know what I mean? Like when you think of like positive feedback, you're giving like, you know, like just there's still a praise, but it's compared to praise, you're not compared to feedback and praise. Feedback, you're more descriptive on what you're praising about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I see why people will confuse it, and are very like specific on like feedback and feedback and praises are not the same thing.
Yes. And they made a point to tell us about that. So I'm assuming that might be something in the exam. So just I guess a thing to remember. Welcome, Brittany. I see somebody just joined us. Okay, we're on page 257, Brittany. Okay, so sometimes common sense language is better. The technical language of behavior analysis is complex. So who can say amen to that statement? Right? You're like, oh my gosh, you could have just said like, I gave him a sticker.
I mean, we learned things from Cooper, so
Yeah,
Cooper's
yeah,
not,
right.
but yeah.
We always have to explain it in the most complex way. So technical language of behavior analysis is complex, and mastering it is no simple matter. I feel like that's the quote of the day for this chapter.
Amen.
um, so it also talks about well-trained practitioners also commit terminology errors, so don't feel bad about yourself. Researchers and experienced authors also make mistakes when writing about behavior analysis. Using behavioral concepts and principles such as positive reinforcement to confidently explain complex situations involving multiple processes and uncontrolled and unknown variables is a mistake that catches the most attentive and conscientious of behavior analysts at times. Okay, so what would be a time where common sense language would be better for you to use? So who should I kind of make it make sense for?
Parents.
Parents, stakeholders.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Parents, teachers, they're not going to understand all our ABA jargon. So they're just going to look at you like you're crazy. So sometimes common sense language is better. Also for insurance, sometimes I kind of make it easier for them to understand. I'm still being objective, but I'm making it a little bit simpler, not as technological. Okay. The role of motivation. Oh my gosh, I love motivation, you guys. So why is motivation so important? Like ABA is centered all around motivation, right? Without motivation, then you would have no need or desire to do anything, right? So motivation comes in different forms. Motivation is an antecedent. That's another important thing to know. Motivation is something that comes before the response. Motivation, we can call it an EO or an AO, right? So there's different ways that motivation can look. So I guess it's gonna start going into the role of motivation and its different altering effects. That's what they call it. It's different altering effects. Okay.
We should
So
probably,
we
I
should probably stop there, huh?
yeah, because it's gonna go into MOs, right? So we can talk about that next week, or
Yeah, because it's gonna get
it's a whole nother topic.
yeah, it's gonna get crazy, I feel like. Okay, they do talk about unconditioned and conditioned later on. Okay, well, I'm gonna pause the recording and then we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about.